A rifle is not just a weapon. Sometimes it is a relic carrying the greatest secrets. And that secret was revealed in the hands of a woman. She didn't want trouble. She just wanted to look at an old M4 carbine replica, a rifle from an era long before most of them were even born. But the clerk laughed at her questions, mocked her limp, called her grandma, and told her to leave. The old woman didn't argue. She left quietly as she always had, one step at a time. What the clerk didn't know was that the name on that woman's dog tag still meant something. And exactly 1 hour later, an entire Navy SEAL team pulled into the parking lot. No sirens, no warnings, just a dozen men walking in formation, dead silent, and asking one question: where is she? Welcome to the Truth in the Mirror family. Before we begin this powerful story of disrespect, loyalty, and redemption, tell me in the comments which city you're watching this video from today. And if you believe real warriors never forget their own, hit that subscribe button. This stories matter. The Iron Compass Armory sat on the edge of town, nestled between a bait store and a hardware warehouse. Its windows were tinted just enough to give the illusion of authority inside. Racks of rifles lined the walls like trophies, and glass counters displayed handguns too polished to look real. Behind the register, two young clerks in their early 20s, Luke and Mark, leaned over their phones, half paying attention to the soft hum of country music playing from the ceiling speaker. The place wasn't busy, but it never needed to be. This was the kind of store that made its money on image, projecting an aura of reliability and expertise. At exactly 10:43 a.m., the front door gently chimed. The woman who entered didn't command attention. She simply existed in a way that made everything around her a little quieter, a quiet gravitas. Her worn boots, jeans patched at the knees, and a brown leather jacket older than half the staff reflected her simple, authentic nature. Her face was weathered but calm. In her late 50s, her hair was subtly graying, but her eyes, sharp and watchful under the brim of a faded Navy SEAL cap, were as keen as ever. She moved slowly but with purpose. Her limp was noticeable but never pitiful. She didn't glance around in confusion. She walked straight to the counter, rested her hand gently on the glass, and simply waited. One of the clerks, Luke, looked up, offering a forced mechanical smile. "Need something, ma'am?" The old woman nodded once. Her voice was steady, each word measured. "Yes, I was wondering if you still carry that M4 carbine replica on the back wall, the real stock model." The young kid blinked, a mocking expression on his face. That's a collector's piece, Grandma. It's not something you'd want to fire." The answer was more a challenge than an insult. "I didn't ask to fire it," the woman said, her voice even and calm. "I just wanted to hold it for a moment. I haven't held a model like that in decades." The second clerk, Mark, a little older, chuckled, a condescending smirk on his face. "That rifle's heavier than it looks, Grandma. Might be a bit much for your back." The old woman didn't smile. She just said, "I used to carry one across jungles in Mogadishu. I can manage it across a showroom," her voice as if stating a simple fact. But the weight of her words subtly shifted the air in the room. That was when the tone changed. The first kid, Luke, laughed too loudly, mockingly. "Okay, Grandma Rambo, unless you're buying, you're just taking up space. Let the real customers in." The second, Mark, added, "Yeah, we're not a museum. Come on, exits that way." The old woman paused for a second. It looked like she was going to say something, maybe correct them, maybe remind them what the name on her dog tag still meant. Perhaps even tell them the story of the scars on her face. But instead, she looked down at the counter, nodded to herself silently, and simply said, "Understood," her voice devoid of anger or disappointment. Then she turned around, walked to the door, and left. There was no protest, no outrage, no demand to speak to the owner, just one woman, alone again, walking slowly back toward the edge of a country that had forgotten what some men gave for it. Inside, the clerks went back to scrolling their phones. Neither of them noticed the woman by the ammo rack, mid-30s, gym shirt, ball cap pulled low, watching the scene in silence. This woman was FBI agent Clara Davis, daughter of Edward Davis and a close relative of Alice Miller, specifically there to observe the incident. Luke and Mark also didn't notice her step outside 2 minutes later, pull a phone from her pocket and make one single call. Clara said only 3 words, her voice cold and clear. She was there. "Get here now." At exactly 11:43 a.m., the parking lot in front of the Iron Compass Armory began to fill, but not with customers. Matte black SUVs pulled in and parked close to the entrance. Their engines stayed on. A minute later, another parked beside it, then a third. No music, no movement, Just quiet, humming machines with dark glass and tinted intentions. Inside the store, the clerks were still joking, still scrolling through their phones, still oblivious that the atmosphere outside was shifting. Then the doors opened, all three at once, and 12 men stepped out. Their movements were deliberate, unhurried, but carried a weight that made people stop mid-step. They weren't loud, they didn't shout, but something about their presence made the air feel heavier, like the silence of an apex predator, out of habit, not nerves. They scanned the street. They crossed the sidewalk in silence and stepped through the front door one by one. The chime rang softly as they entered, and even that sound felt different. Not a single word was spoken. They simply spread out in a calm, semicircular formation facing the counter. The youngest clerk, Luke, seated on a stool behind the register, barely looked up from his phone. "Welcome in, gents. Looking for anything specific today?" he said without much interest. Then he glanced up and froze. The 12 men were still quiet, eyes locked on him. The oldest of them, graying hair, square jaw, chest-bearing rows of ribbons, and the unmistakable SEAL trident, stepped forward. This was Captain Liam Wraith O'Connell, commanding officer of the Navy SEAL team. "An hour ago," he said evenly, his voice as low as a whisper but as sharp as a hammer blow, "one of us walked through this door." His voice wasn't loud, but it hit with force, piercing the deepest corners of Luke's soul. As Captain O'Connell's calm yet cutting words echoed in the room, the second clerk, Mark, cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Sir, I think there's a misunderstanding. We were just—" O'Connell cut him off with nothing but a look, not allowing him to finish. His gaze made Mark feel as small as a fly. "She didn't come here to be honored," the SEAL continued, his voice now almost a whisper, but clearly audible to everyone in the room. "She didn't ask to be recognized. She just wanted to see a rifle she hadn't touched since Mogadishu, a model she hadn't held in decades." Luke and Mark's faces went ashen. O'Connell pulled a scorched, folded and worn flag patch from his pocket. Captain O'Connell slowly placed the scorched flag patch on the glass counter. "She pulled this off my uniform when I was bleeding out in Kandahar," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Carried me out on foot for 22 hours with no radio, no backup, and a hole in my side the size of a fist." His eyes locked onto the young clerks, each word a hammer blow. "She never told anyone about it, never asked for thanks, but when she walked in here today, you treated her like a problem. You called her grandma. You threw her out." The younger clerk, Luke, swallowed hard, shifting in place, his eyes flicking toward the door as if hoping to escape, but he remained paralyzed. The SEAL commander didn't move. "We're not here for revenge," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. "We don't need an apology. But she won't speak for herself, so we're speaking for her. We want you to know who she is." Another SEAL stepped forward and placed a black and white photograph on the glass. 8 men, arms slung over shoulders, dust-caked and sunburned but smiling, stood in the desert. The man in the center, younger then, but unmistakably the same person, the one they had mocked an hour ago, stood with arms crossed and a half-smile that said nothing and everything at once. The clerk, Luke's mouth opened slightly. "I didn't know," he whispered. O'Connell nodded slowly. "Exactly. You didn't ask. No threats, no demands, just the stark, brutal truth." Then Captain O'Connell turned and the others followed, all 12 of them walking out the same way they came in, silently, without fanfare, leaving behind a silence no bullet could replicate. Outside, a small crowd had started to gather, drawn by instinct more than curiosity. Phones came out, not to film but to record just in case they forgot how it felt to see something like this. The SEALs didn't acknowledge them. They didn't need to. They got back in their vehicles and drove off one after another like nothing had happened. But something had. Because inside, the air in the Iron Compass armory didn't return to normal. The clerk, Luke, slowly sat down, staring at the photo still sitting in front of him. For the first time, he realized he hadn't just thrown out an old woman. He had dismissed history. And now the entire world was about to learn who they'd really pushed out the door. By 1:45 p.m., the photo had already gone viral in 3 veteran Facebook groups. It was taken by a customer who had walked in just after the SEALs arrived. 12 men standing in complete silence inside the gun shop, all facing the counter where 2 clerks stood frozen behind the register. No fists, no shouting, just stillness and a presence too heavy to ignore. The caption simply read, "When you disrespect a SEAL, you get all of them." At first, most people didn't understand the context. The post was shared and reshared, often with nothing but the American flag emoji. Then someone asked in the comments, who was the old woman they were standing for? That's when everything changed. By 2:12 p.m. a name emerged in the comments. Master Sergeant retired Alice Ghost Miller. She was a woman who had been seen around town for years but rarely spoken much. Always polite, always alone, always wearing the same beat-up Shadow Ops unit cap. No one had ever asked what it meant until now. One commenter wrote, "She was my uncle's CO in '91, saved 3 men in Mogadishu, didn't talk about it once after coming home." Another added, "If that's Miller we're talking about, she's a real ghost. The kind of person you only hear about in briefings, never in the news." Someone found a grainy scanned personnel summary buried in a military archive and uploaded it under the photo. Master Sergeant retired Alice Miller, Shadow Ops unit joined in 1966, retired in 2004, Bronze Star, Silver Star, Purple Heart, multiple unlisted commendations. Records showed service across Vietnam, Mogadishu, Kandahar, and Iraq, over 35 confirmed personnel extractions in hostile zones. There was no autobiography, no press coverage, no interviews, just decades of silence, decades of doing the job. By 3 p.m. the local news station had carried the story on its headlines. Silent visit. 12 Navy SEALs came to a gun store to support a local veteran. The article didn't give sensational details, just the facts. A woman had come, she had been asked to leave. An hour later a team had arrived, and suddenly a silent, ignored figure had become a symbol of everything people had forgotten to respect. The silence in the shop hadn't lifted. The clerks hadn't spoken to each other for over an hour. The photograph the Navy SEALs had left was on the counter, a black and white group photo of 8 men in the desert, muddy, sunburned, young but with hard eyes. Miller was in the middle, arms crossed, with a half-smile that said nothing but told everything. Customers who came later didn't ask for ammunition or gear. They asked who the woman in the photo was. They asked if she would come back. An old customer, a Marine from Desert Storm, looked at the photo in front of the counter for a minute, then saluted and walked out without saying a word. By 4 p.m. a veteran-owned publication had published a short piece titled, "The Ones Who Stand When You're Gone." The piece ended with a line that would be quoted thousands of times over the following days. Alice Miller didn't need to speak. Her silence was covered by 12 voices who chose not to raise theirs either. Inside, the owner of the Iron Compass Armory, Mr. Harrison, arrived, pale, holding his phone in one hand, trying to process what had just happened. The photo had been sent to him twice already before he even pulled into the parking lot. The scorched flag patch that had been left on the counter remained untouched. He didn't blame the clerks. He didn't even speak to them. He simply walked to the display case, took out the M4 carbine the old woman had asked to see, and placed it on the counter beside the photo. Then he took a sheet of paper, wrote something by hand, and slid it into a clear frame next to the weapon. No fanfare, just a single line of text. "She carried it once, we'll carry the memory now." Outside the armory, someone had placed a single white flower against the door, then a challenge coin, then a folded piece of paper with nothing but the word respect. By nightfall, a small crowd had gathered. Some came to pay respects, others just wanted to see the place where something real had happened. There were no protests, no chants, no outrage, only quiet, a kind of reverent hush that spoke more than 1,000 headlines ever could. As for Alice Miller, she didn't respond to the coverage, didn't post, didn't grant interviews. She wasn't even aware of the online wave building behind her. She went home the same way she'd arrived, unnoticed. But for the first time in years, when someone passed her on the sidewalk, they didn't just glance past her, they looked twice, because now the town knew exactly who they'd asked to leave and who had answered in her place. In the days that followed, something shifted in town. Not dramatically, not publicly, but deeply. The gun shop, once just another business with a cash register and a rack of tactical gear, transformed into something else. It wasn't about weapons anymore, it was about memory. People came not to shop, but to reflect. Veterans walked through the door not with a list, but with stories. Some left patches from their own units beside Miller's photo. Others asked quietly, "Is she okay?" No one really knew. The truth was that Master Sergeant Alice Miller hadn't changed her routine. She still walked 2 miles every morning before the sun got too high, still stopped at the same corner cafe for black coffee and no sugar, still sat alone at the back booth, the one no one ever asked to share, and she never once mentioned the day she was thrown out or the men who showed up behind her, not to the waitress, not to the cook, not even to the old Marine who sometimes nodded at her across the room, but people noticed anyway. When a local high school, Lakeview High, invited veterans to speak in history class, Miller didn't reply. But the week after, the principal received an envelope. Inside was a single handwritten letter describing a rescue op in 1970. No name, no signature, just a map reference and the names of the 6 men saved. The letter was framed and hung in Lakeview High's hallway without ceremony. Back at the Iron Compass Armory, they kept the scorched patch in the display case. The owner, who hadn't been there the day of the incident, had it mounted in glass beside it. He added a simple inscription, "For the woman we didn't recognize, and the brothers who wouldn't let us forget." The story made its way across veteran forums, then onto talk radio, then quietly into policy meetings. No one reported on it because what happened that day wasn't a protest, it wasn't a fight, it was something rarer. Men standing for one of their own without saying a word. And the message was received.